finish it while you're doing that.
Salutations, respected viewers. I am George from Ireland. So this video is about Theresa May's gambit, her attempt to secure Brexit. So yesternight she made an announcement. People are thinking, is she going early? Is she calling a snap election? Is she going to stage a second referendum? Is she going to withdraw Article 50? But no, and she's saying that this cannot go on indefinitely. Well, that's certainly true. Then again, Remainers, the ultra-Remainers, would rather it goes on indefinitely than the United Kingdom leaves the European Union. So what she announced is that she was inviting the leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition to talks. That's Jeremy Corbyn. It's remarkable that she hasn't done so already. So they had their talks and they were congenial and supposedly fruitful. Likewise, she had a one-on-one discussion with Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland and leader of the SNP, convener of the SNP, to use a proper title. Indeed, those were said to be productive as well, their exchange of views. So why is she doing this? Well, really, it's to break the logjam and try to get Labour on board to agree some sort of Brexit. I don't think it's an attempt to wrong-foot Labour. The absolute cynics would say that. Sometimes there's the cock-up theory and the conspiracy theory. In this case, it really is the cock-up theory, which is generally the case, because she's tried every which way to get Brexit, a soft Brexit. Doesn't want to go to leave without an agreement, hasn't ruled it out. The one thing she seems to have excluded is actually cancelling Article 50 and saying we're going to stay in the European Union long term. Well, and also a second referendum. However, the possibility of a customs union seems to be linked to only if there's a second referendum to affirm that. So Corbyn took some flack for even going to the meeting, which is ridiculous. If Corbyn agrees to Brexit on any terms, this will incense some of the ultra-Remainers within his own party. Now, perhaps oddly, the moderates on other policies, on economic policies, tend to be the hardline Remainers in Labour, who might try and kick him out. And remember, they've tried and failed before. So Corbyn's been leader for, how many years now? 4 years now, well past the honeymoon, and his stock is dipping. Remember, within, say, 3 months, he'll be facing a new Conservative leader. So that'll be more difficult for him. Someone who's more popular than May, who's more credible than May, it'd be difficult to be less credible than her. So Corbyn is caught on the horns of a dilemma. But because if he does not agree to do something to help Brexit along, that will anger the leavers in his party. There are not many of them in the parliamentary party, but it will anger quite a few Labour voters, and it will anger a lot of floating voters, particularly in Northern England where Labour is strong. Now, on the other hand, those are usually safe Labour seats. The average majority in the UK is something like 15%. Each an MP having a 15% majority in his or her constituency. And in those Northern English ones, Labour's safer than that. So they wouldn't be losing many seats over this. But if he's to be prime ministerial, he's got to rise above partisan politics and say, what's good for the United Kingdom as a whole? Put the national interest first. Okay, Brexit was decided on. We'll implement Brexit and we'll end the uncertainty. We've got to break the deadlock. So, but he knows he's in a bit of a quiet quandary. Whatever else you say about him, he's not a naif. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, and he's been in Parliament since 1983, and he was obviously a zealous socialist campaigner for years before that. Now, Theresa May is not personally ambitious. I don't think she's into playing cunning games. She's already acknowledged that Brexit has spelt finis to her career. She said that she will stand down once this whole thing is finalised. Remember, the default setting would be leaving in 9 days, 12th of April. That's a fortnight extension. It could be as long as 22nd of May. And remember, if the United Kingdom is going to stay in longer than that, it should hold elections to the European Parliament. It would be in breach of its legal obligation to do so, still being a member state of the European Union. Now, and Theresa May's not an astute tactician. She's come to this rather late. I would have done this probably a long time ago to try and bind him in. What she's done, though, has infuriated some of the hardliners of her own party, saying, oh, we'll have no truck with a Marxist. Someone was saying, they're saying this. It doesn't matter if he's a Marxist or not, right? Is he going to vote for Brexit? And if you're a Brexiteer, you should want that. He might be dead wrong on everything else, but if he's right on this, you would be foolish and bigoted not to work with him. So Theresa May is not going to go down in history as a fabulous premier, and she's perhaps thinking of a legacy now, but if she could at least secure Brexit on reasonable terms, that would be something. It would be folly in failing to get an agreement, and it's difficult to overestimate the weariness, the fatigue, and the sense of bewilderment in other European leaders at all this. So within Parliament, there are three broad groups. Not talking about political parties now. Remember before the referendum, about 80% of MPs were Remainers, only about 20% were Leavers. The Leavers were Conservatives almost without exception. But now, after the 2017 election, we can divide Parliament into three broad groups. This is the House of Commons. About 40% are still Remainers. About 10% are hardline Leavers. And about 50% are pro-agreement. What agreement? That is the rub. Okay? So that's why I have to say about 50%, because obviously there's a blur between these three groups. So there's some people who straddle the hardline leave or agreement border. They might vote leave without agreement, but they might vote to leave with an agreement if this is an agreement acceptable to them. On the other hand, there are people who might vote for an agreement or might vote to remain, depending on what the contents of that agreement are. So amongst the pro-agreement people, it's never quite reached 50% or never exceeded 50%, otherwise things would have passed. So a minority of them were Leavers before the 2017 election, and a majority of them were Remainers, but they are now converts saying, okay, I want us to remain, but people voted for this in the referendum, so therefore we are duty-bound to enact the will of the people. So Parliament voted on various deals the other day, and these were indicative votes. What would Parliament support? The Norway-style deal came highest with the customs union. The trouble is that comes with free movement, if I'm not mistaken, and the United Kingdom would not be able to strike independent trade deals, would always be part of the European Union trade deals, would have to accept some regulations in which the United Kingdom had no voice. There are other particulars like what contribution, if any, would there be to the European Union, and would the UK be part of the European Space Agency? That's actually not an EU thing, but a lot of people don't realise that. Most EU member states are part of it, a few that are not are part of it, or the Erasmus programme, which is a university exchange thing. Would the UK be part of that? So there's some of the particulars to be sorted out. And people wanted a second referendum on this Norway-style agreement. Now, this should be quite palatable to Remainers. It should soften the blow. If they don't want to leave, okay, the United Kingdom is leaving, but in a sense not fully. You'd still enjoy many of the benefits of EU membership, not all of them from a Remainer perspective, and you'd avoid the repercussions of a hard Brexit. That lost by 3 votes. That came the closest to passing. But the Leavers might have to swallow the pill, as there's got to be a second referendum, which they might lose. But for Remainers, it's almost a win-win situation, the Norway-style deal. If they had a second referendum and they win, and the UK staying in the European Union, fantastic, hallelujah, from a hardline Remainer point of view. And if they lose, well, it's only halfway out. And they might even see their way to saying there's no sense being half in, half out, let's rejoin fully, so that they think they could reverse the whole thing a few years down the line. So it should deflect some concerns of the Remainers and sell it as a semi-Brexit. It should allay their worst fears. Oh, we won't be able to import things and stuff like that, and we won't have markets for our goods, and what will we do? We can't use the common European airspace, and on and on. So these worries would be misplaced in the case of a Norway-style deal. There'd be a lot of continuity, and I know the pound would jump, the stock market would like it. There could be an early election. And if there is an early election, what will happen? Now, the SNP, remember they had their annus mirabilis in 2015, 50% of the vote, 56 of the 59 Scottish seats. So the SNP obviously went down a bit in 2017 to 37% of the vote. In Scotland, 35 of the seats. They'll probably go down again a bit, not that much. Lib Dems, not very credible at the moment. Vince Cable standing down. And despite there being the hardline Europhile party, this doesn't seem to have paid any dividends for them. The SNP had been in office a long time. I know there's a Westminster election, not a Holyrood election, but inevitably what goes up must come down. Labour, though, again, they're not connecting that well. So I think Labour would make small gains in Scotland. This is the odd thing, because Scotland's more left-wing than the rest of the UK. You think Corbyn, being the most far-left Labour leader ever, would really do well at the doorstep in Caledonia, but apparently that's not the case. So SNP is extreme Remain. But again, they're in a win-win situation. If the United Kingdom decides to stay within the EU anyway, fantastic from their point of view. If the UK leaves, they think that gives them another bite of the cherry. This gives them a moral case for a second referendum on leaving the United Kingdom. Anyway, Westminster is palsied. There's misgovernment in London. That's another SNP talking point. It's yet another reason why North Britain needs to split. So in this bitter, frustrated state of mind, the SNP will be disappointed if there's not chaos at a UK level. They do not want moderation on this one, the SNP, oddly. So it seems to me the ultimate in self-contradiction to say we must separate from England, from whom we're so utterly dissimilar, but we must be united with Croatia and Bulgaria, for instance. Not that I'm against Croatia and Bulgaria at all, but I'm just saying the connections between Scotland and those countries are tenuous at best, when obviously I don't even need to tell you just how interrelated Scotland and England have been for millennia. So Corbyn so far has played it a bit poker-faced, not giving much away whether he'll do this or not. The ball in his court is in his court piece, and leadership is a lonely thing. He's got to seem statesman-like if he was to be prime ministerial material. It would have been a grave error of judgment to refuse to go and even discuss it. He's in the Privy Council. So the leaders of political parties and cabinet ministers and so on, they're all in the Privy Council. They can be sworn in on Privy Council terms, as in private council, to be a private council for the Queen, but it's really the politicians meeting each other, saying, this is top secret, you and I, and on your honour, you're not going to tell the public about this, and in the national interest to try to find a way forward. So if he says, okay, I'm going to whip my party to vote leave, he'll be saturated with pleas to remain. I think probably the only sweetener would have to be a second referendum. Then I think the Labour Party and most of them might live with it. So this is based on the assumption by some of the hardline Remainers that to leave the EU cannot fail but to harm the UK gravely. They think it will necessarily be catastrophic. It's difficult to sustain that argument if there's a Norway-style agreement. This whole thing is meant to have been catastrophic, so we were told by many of the so-called experts. Their predictions on this have so often been way off the mark. Look at the economic growth since the Brexit vote. Look at unemployment down to the lowest level ever. If this is a disaster, I don't know what success is. And I remember these Jeremiads a few years ago. They're doom-laden prognostications about what was going to happen. And, a week ago, the UK was supposed to leave. Well, less than a week ago. And the last few days, people actually just became very placid and philosophical about it. Remember the old canards about there'll be no medicines and we're not going to get any fruit? A complete fallacy. These were patent absurdities trotted out by Remainers. Now, there are some reasonable concerns. And I was speaking to a billionaire investor the other day, and he was saying, yeah, there will be some teething problems. Of course, there'll be some difficulties in the transitional period, but really it will sort itself out. It's not going to be that bad. And also from a Leaver perspective, you think this is going to be like manna from heaven. It's not going to be as fantastic as you pretend. In this case, the truth is in the middle. It's not always the case that, it's somewhere in the middle, but in this case, very likely it is. So the fact that so many Remainers were peddling these flagrant falsehoods really raises doubts about their earnestness in everything they've said. It would be remarkable if the whole thing is not sorted out by the 22nd of May. So Remain want to stall and stall. They're playing for time. They want to kick it into the long ditch because the longer the UK is in the EU, the better. They don't want to go anywhere. And if they delay it, the whole thing might run out of steam. The public might just be jaded with it. There could be an election, and bringing a Remainer government to office. There could be a second referendum. The EU might make some concessions. Anything could happen. So time can only be on their side. The demographics move in their direction. The geriatrics who've died in the last 3 years were mostly Leave voters, something like 70% Leave voters. Talking about people, octogenarians and so on. And the people who've been enfranchised, turned 18 in the last 3 years, or gained citizenship in the last 3 years, they break quite heavily towards Remain, at least 60%. Obviously, a lot more young people than there are elderly people, although the propensity of young people to vote is lower. So people shouldn't pretend that Brexit is a force for evil. I'm not saying that Remain is either. So I'm perfectly sure that the EU does not want more secession, which is why it had to drive quite a hard bargain with the UK to make an example of it, lest others say, "Ooh, well, we should do the same thing." Tusk saying this is a calamity. Who else? Guy Verhofstadt tweeting even today it was a calamity, the former Belgian Prime Minister. Wow. To think that democracy is catastrophic, that really speaks volumes that they should even say that, when the EU is supposed to have that as one of its core principles, using referenda repeatedly for more integration. But the moment a referendum result comes along they don't like, suddenly that referendum is an affront to civilization. The hypocrisy is nauseating. It beggars belief. The EU is supposed to be founded on the will of the people. So think back to the Eastern European communist countries until 1989. They did not go by the will of the people, and look what happened to them. They are one with Nineveh and Tyre. So membership of the EU should not be forced down the throat of the majority. And as I said, I know that it was a bare majority voted for Brexit. And as a reasonable person, that's why I think, okay, we'll make some proportionate concessions to the other side, to the Remainers. Some of the moderate Remainers say, all right, we can live with that. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. This is not, in that sense, a zero-sum game. Willing to be reasonable, to make concessions, to agree things I don't particularly like. Finally, this could be out of the way, Brexit, and the government be able to tackle knife crime, to try and improve the NHS, to do something about education and the environment. Now, oddly, this might actually favour Labour because, well, some of these things are supposed to be more their policy areas, and the agenda's been off what they want, and they want to get the spotlight back onto public services and things like that, and wages and inequality, tax the rich and makes them pay. When it says something about national sovereignty and constitutional matters, perhaps these are stronger suits for the Conservatives. So it's astonishing, despite this Westminster merry-go-round, which doesn't reflect great credit on the government. The Conservatives are not doing that badly in the polls, but it's just because Parliament wouldn't vote the way the Prime Minister wanted. And okay, in a way, it's a healthy thing. We shouldn't regard this as calamitous, that there is a genuine Parliament. It's no rubber stamp. It's willing to scrutinise the executive. It's willing to inflict many humiliating defeats in the executive. In fact, we should be proud of that and applaud that. There are many authoritarian regimes, so that sort of thing would be unthinkable. But I think very likely we sorted out one way or the other with it within 2 months. Brexit, there's probably going to be a half Brexit.